Judith, a great big welcome. Today you've agreed to speak to us. You, of course, have a long history with psychosynthesis, having met Assagioli back in the day. And we thought it would be interesting to, as part of our series on continuing the conversation, to include your voice as being one of the formative people within psychosynthesis. Where would you like to start?
I think I'd like to start at the beginning of my initial meeting with psychosynthesis, not knowing it was psychosynthesis at the time. So we're going back into the mists of the 70s here. And John Whitmore, who was Diana Whitmore's husband at the time, suggested that my then husband and I attend a course. We went on this course, and he was introducing lots of self-awareness techniques, using a lot of imagery, a lot of relaxation. And at one stage, I found myself going, God, this is amazing. This person is talking about my inner experience. This person is able to articulate what I feel to be true for me. And I want to do that. So whatever it is that he's doing, I want to do that. I think in 1972 or 1973, I went with a group of 8 people to meet Assagioli in Florence. He was, I think he died in 1974. So he was very elderly when I met him. Or we met him. I did have a one-to-one session with him, a brief one-to-one session with him. He was a very typical wise old man. That's what I thought when I first met him. And there are pictures of him in his velvet smoking jacket. I don't think he smoked, but he had his velvet smoking jacket. So he walked into this study that was sort of full of books and had a real, it was quite dark because in Italy, there's the shutters and keep everything cool. And there was this slightly wizened old man sitting behind his desk, but it was lovely. I'm really delighted that I met him. I think, though, I would like to have met him a few years later when I was a little further down the road. I think I asked him, I think I said something, I don't remember exactly, that I was engaged in my personal psychosynthesis and wasn't sure when would I start my transpersonal psychosynthesis or something like that. Yeah. And his response to me was, don't worry, basically be patient, it'll happen, which was very nice. My time there was delightful. And at one point we were meditating on the top of the hotel we were staying in. And I had one of those lovely peak experiences that pop in out of the blue. And that sort of confirmed to me that this is really what I want to be doing and working on. Although I think, to be fair, I was half asleep at the time. I hadn't really woken up yet. December of 1975, I upped sticks. I left England and I moved to California for 2 reasons. One was to pursue my interest in psychosynthesis, but also to go and live with Judith Firman, who I had fallen deeply in love with at the time. And I continued my training in psychosynthesis there. Whilst I was there were a lot of things that happened in California, and there's a long, very sad story about the distortions of psychosynthesis, ego inflation, erupting shadow. And it is a story, and perhaps not for today, but it is a story that I think needs to be told, because psychosynthesis is a wonderful, beautiful, creative psychology, but it has its shadows. There's so much light in it that there's also can be a lot of dark in it. And unfortunately, I was on the receiving end of some of that darkness. And again, I'm going to just cut the long story short. I came back to England in 1979 and was never going to have anything to do with psychosynthesis again. I'd been home maybe a couple of months, and Diana Whitmore reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in sharing an office space with her, a practice space with her, which I then agreed to. I thought I will do that, but if I'm going to practice psychosynthesis, if this was for one-to-one work, I'm going to do it my way. And I decided that it was either work or it wouldn't work. And actually, it could be a really good opportunity for me to test all the theories that I had not seen lived in California, to test the theories out, and they worked. You know, the theory and the experience worked. So that was really important for me. And I said, okay, I will continue to work in psychosynthesis, and I will continue to do it my way. So it probably wasn't very long. It might have been within a year. Diana asked me if I would start being involved in training and in teaching. I think I said no to teaching initially, and I did do some supervision work with people, but then gradually got more and more involved. So this would be around 1980, 81, 82, something like that. So in the very early days of the Psychosynthesis and Education Trust, a lot of what we did was to create more of a structure to the training program. It had always been, certainly in California and other places, very ad hoc. There was no real flow to things. You became a psychosynthesis guide, because that's what we were called, a psychosynthesis guide. But there was nothing that taught you how to begin that, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. There was nothing about rules and regulations. It was all let's be generous, it was very fluid. It was very fluid at the time. And gradually over the years, we brought more structure in. Sometimes I didn't always agree with what we were doing. And I think Diana and I had a very creative relationship. We were very different people. And there were times when that difference was stunningly creative. And I'm really proud of what got built. And there were times when those differences were not so interesting and were quite difficult for both of us.
Yes, I hear lots of people who trained in the early days talk about the impact of your training on them.
Yes, I think in thinking about this interview, I was thinking, so what did I bring? What was it perhaps that I brought in doing psychosynthesis my way? And what I mean by that is teaching my way, but teaching the principles, staying quite true to the principles, but teaching it my way. And I think there were two things that people always said to me. One was they loved the humor that I brought, that somehow I could bring a lightness to a topic. And the other thing was that for me, when I originally was in the training, I really struggled sometimes with the concepts because they were taught in a very intellectual way in California. There were some fabulous minds over there, but they were very elevated. It all felt very elevated to me, and not always kind of grounded in day-to-day living and experience. So I think one of the things I became very good at was, once I understood the principles, to translate it into a more day-to-day language, a more accessible language.
And it does seem to sit really well against a backdrop of Assagioli, where what he did was try to make psychosynthesis accessible.
Yes.
Every day. Yeah.
He did. And the other thing that I think was an important contribution was to explicitly bring in sexuality into the training. So in California, my training in California was never discussed. Or taught. Along with a lot of things that weren't taught. So I felt it was an important topic to bring into the training.
Yeah, and really provided it. I think that's one of the things that has been very rich at the Trust, is the teaching of sexualities and genders.
In all of the courses that I ran, although I'm not a body worker by any sense of the word, I always tried to use body. I used music, trying to work with all of those 6 functions. So not just the mind, but also the feelings and emotion, the senses. I'm not going to remember them all now, but creativity, whatever that other one is and whatever the other one is, that I kind of had that as a template for my work, to explore into those different areas and how we might use psychosynthesis with the senses, for example. So if you're working one-to-one with someone, that your questions don't have to, of course, be what are you thinking, or what are you feeling? It's kind of what are you sensing, what are you smelling? All of those different dimensions. I tried to bring that in. I don't think I was unique in that, but it didn't seem very present in the training back then, all of those things.
And I think those are still questions that are relevant and current today. How to really make psychosynthesis accessible and to create awareness in our work. How you've used psychosynthesis in your life, your work and your life?
In 1995, I think it was, I left the Trust, and I made a decision to step away from therapy in 95 or 96 and to become a business coach, which was a huge step for me. But my coaching was always informed by psychosynthesis. So that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was that I met my wife, my now wife, and who was Swiss, and we decided to start a center in Switzerland together. And again, forgive me, I can't remember the dates. It was all around the same time. And we wanted to create a training that was different to the training in London. So what we wanted to do that was somewhat different was we wanted to teach psychosynthesis through what's called in Switzerland self-experience. So the first 2 years of the training were very experiential with very little theory. It was all learned through experience. And for some people that was it. So it was 2 years, and it was I suppose it goes back to the idea it was personal psychosynthesis. And then the second part of the training was another 2 years. And the offer was, come along and learn the theory now of what you've been experiencing and find how you can apply it in your world of work, whatever you're doing. And we had nurses, we had doctors, we had social workers, we had a whole range of individuals who then took psychosynthesis and the theory of it based in their experience out into the world. And we thought it was a very good model. And we called it, we didn't expect people to write papers. This will seem a bit heretical now, but to write papers. We called it an adult system. They could write them if they wanted to, but they didn't have to. And we worked very successfully and ran it very successfully. Sorry.
Did people write papers?
Some did. Some wrote papers. Some created collages, books of collages. Some people wrote poems. Some people didn't do any written work at all. And because the training in Switzerland, in order to work as a therapist, you have to do a university degree. So we couldn't offer people any kind of accreditation. We gave them certificates and said what they did. So at last I was liberated from all the accreditation work.
I guess in some way, you know, that applied psychosynthesis approach was probably, you know, pre all of the coaching courses that that abound today.
Yes, it was pre then, absolutely pre then. I became a trainer of coaches. That was one of the things that I did when I stopped teaching psychosynthesis, because I did eventually decide to stop teaching psychosynthesis. That was after teaching maybe 1 million basic training courses. I decided it was probably time to do something different. Although I loved it, I did want to do something different. So yes, I became I trained coaches, I supervised coaches, I worked as a coach, one-to-one teams. I worked at senior level with very senior individuals, and psychosynthesis was always in there, the threads of psychosynthesis. And probably the most powerful one is just the attitude and the attitude of I'm sitting opposite a self here, you know, that, you know, the impact of that.
Yeah.
So
looking back, because, you know, it's only a couple of minutes and it's a whole rich life of work that you've done in and around psychosynthesis. Is that initial spark, that initial thing that drew you. What do you think of that moment now, looking back? Shaped your life in some way.
Well, it did. I mean, prior to then, I was working at IBM, you know.
Word.
Yeah, I mean, it was a moment. I had that moment where listening and hearing someone speak about my inner life. Mm-hmm. And the other moment was a visualization where I was sitting in the middle of a huge yellow chrysanthemum. And going, it was like a trip, you know, it's like, wow, you know, this is me here, this is me. And so yes, a fire was lit. I think that would be a way of saying it, or a light was a bit of oxygen came into so whatever light there was in me, then I felt something grow in me, and the inspiration to share the light, actually. Yeah, which still do.